recipient is most worthy of this award for her principled contribution, her significant contribution to defending freedom in Canada. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Frances Widdowson.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to hear my humble words of wisdom about the current situation in largely universities, but I think universities have an effect on the wider society. First of all, I just wanted to thank the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. I've had a lot of interaction with the Justice Center over the last, I guess it's been about 5 years or maybe longer, but certainly started to heat up in 2023. And there's a number of lawyers who have been very helpful in pushing forward a number of cases. James Mason, I believe, is here tonight. Glenn Blackett has been very influential. Marty Moore, Andre Memori, and of course Marcy, who's helped to put together this event tonight. And in terms of Mount Royal University, people think that, many people at Mount Royal abandoned me, maybe, but that's not true. A number of colleagues at Mount Royal have really helped me a great deal, and they continue to help me. And that's been a great source of support, both intellectual and emotional. And then finally, I would like to thank Albert Howard, my husband, who's here tonight, for his intellectual and emotional support, and for putting up with me for the last 3 years, because I've been obsessed. I've been completely obsessed about the situation that has happened, and I don't think that it's misguided. This is terrible what has happened, and everyone should realize that this was not normal, what happened at Mount Royal University. And if the government of Alberta is listening to this talk, we need an open inquiry about universities in Alberta, because I know of many professors who have had serious problems in their universities, but they just need to have the opening to come and talk about what terrible things have gone on at not just Mount Royal, but a number of other institutions. So, in December 2021, the world of Albertan and I, it changed. When I was fired from Mount Royal University, and that was a serious breach of what universities are supposed to be about. And in September 2020, I actually received an award for the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. I gave a speech in Calgary, and I'm a board member for the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, so I am quite aware of the terrible situation that universities are currently in right now, but I had no idea about how terrible things were. I probably would have proceeded anyway in terms of trying to fight them, not giving them 1/1000th of 1 inch in terms of the situation, but it certainly was much worse than I had thought, because I remember saying in 2020, universities are in terrible trouble. I remember making those comments, and that is certainly was the case then, and it is even more so now. And in the case of my firing from Mount Royal University, which I should mention has been extensively documented on the website www.wokeacademy.info. So there's all the details about my case that can be released at this time. And I highly recommend people take a look at that website. And I don't want to get into all the details right now because it just take too long and maybe people are already aware of the situation. But what was claimed was that my employment relationship with Mount Royal University was unviable. That's what they claimed. And they added 12 items that were just completely made up. They were made up. And I've done a video with Daniel Page, who is a professor from, he was at the University of Regina. He's a person with technological expertise. And we did a video called MRU Murders Academic Freedom. And it talks about a particular case in a meeting in March 2021. And it goes over the entire false charges that were made. And the surprising thing was, even though this happened, Mount Royal continued to just make this case, which was obviously false. They did not care at all about the fact that what they were saying was not true. And they've done this over and over again. But who will hold them to account? Who is going to suffer consequences for the terrible things that were done at Mount Royal University? And we're still waiting to hear what's going to happen. And I went through an unbelievably abusive process over the year of 2023, where I was subjected to 30 hearing days of arbitration spread over an entire year with a treacherous, an unbelievably treacherous union and a completely incompetent arbitrator by the name of David Philip Jones, who charges $800 an hour for his services, supposedly an expert in administrative law, for which there is no evidence in this case. He provided no legal reasons in his case. He was a glorified note taker that seemed to be aligned with Mount Royal University for some reason with which we do not understand. Anyway, David Philip Jones decided that I was wrongfully terminated. That in itself is amazing, since one would have expected for him to have said, yes, that was totally justified. But Dr. Widdowson cannot be reinstated because there is friction amongst her and her colleagues, because they cannot tolerate views which are in opposition to their own position. And this is all documented on the wokeacademy.info site. For example, I think that there's only two sexes. And that, according to one chair of the Sociology and Anthropology Department, Mary Lee Mulholland, indicates that I think that trans people don't exist and therefore I'm denying their humanity. Gabrielle, who used to be called Gabrielle Lindstrom, but now she goes by her maiden name, Gabrielle Weaselhead, argues that asking questions about indigenous science is racist and discriminatory, and that should not be allowed at the university. Anyway, whether or not these positions can be put forward in a university, I think we should be charitable and allow the discussions to happen. But why are these people saying that I cannot return to Mount Royal University. And why is the arbitrator David Philip Jones accepting their ridiculous ideas? And this just goes on, and I'm waiting for some sane person to intervene and say, this is crazy, enough is enough. But that never happens. It just goes on and on and on. And, we're gonna go, I will push this till the end. We will go to the Supreme Court of Canada, not that we're expecting any, great result from that, but I want these people to put their words on paper. I want them to be accountable for their ridiculous positions so that we can document for future generations where we went wrong as an institution and universities in general. Because it's just absolutely unacceptable what's happening. So, my demand is that I must be reinstated at Mount Royal University. Anything less is just completely unacceptable and indicates that we do not have academic institutions anymore, where you can pursue the truth and you can follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads you to making the argument that there's only two sexes and the remains of 215 children have not been found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and it is extremely improbable that that is the case, because not one parent has said that their child never came home from the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And if that's the case, who are the 200 or 215 bodies that are buried in that apple orchard? But that idea cannot be expressed in universities today. So, although Mount Royal is a particular case of which I am intimately familiar, far too familiar, and as far as I'm concerned, it's part of a wider problem that people are probably aware of, which is that the pursuit of truth, the idea of pursuing truth at the university has been completely destroyed. It does not exist anymore as a value in the universities. But my difficulty is trying to convince people that this is a problem. I don't understand how we've come this far. But people need to realize this is a serious problem. If you have universities that are not able to do that, there will be terrible consequences. If you have universities that are unable, people in universities are unable to pursue the truth, and I believe these things have been documented in terms of the university's function in the society. First of all, knowledge, the idea of the development of knowledge. Most of our knowledge is produced in universities. If we don't have knowledge being produced and the knowledge is highly suspect, you're going to have all sorts of problems, because people are going to be thinking something is true and it's actually not true. And there's many things that this is going to destabilize the system. As well, professionals, we rely on doctors and lawyers and teachers and so on, and they're trained in universities. So your doctor is not going to have an understanding of the causes of disease, and there's going to be massive problems about that. And then finally, the universities used to be the area where we would be able to pursue the truth without consequences, because you have tenure and you're protected, and so you can be in one of the only place that I know where you can challenge your employer and say they're doing really ridiculous things, and you can't be fired because you're protected, and that doesn't exist anymore. That is completely over, as my case indicates. So, although, as I mentioned, this is all documented on the wokeacademy.info site, and I'm trying to make as much as I can public. Some things are still under an arbitration order, and I'm getting challenged every day about the things that I make public, and to be honest, I suffer a great deal because of this, because this shows that I just can't get along with my colleagues and my university. I'm in fact harming their reputation. Well, they're the ones that are harming their reputation because they have no respect for evidence-based reasoning and the pursuit of truth, which is what they should be defending. It's just an absurd situation. Anyway, but unfortunately, it's not just Mount Royal that is, victim of these sort of silly things that are going on. It's across the country, and although I appreciate the honor that is being bestowed upon me as an individual, I really don't think that's the main point. The main point is I am here to tell Canadians that we have serious problems in universities across the country, and I am going across the country to sound the alarm about these institutions. And I've traveled across the country to British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario. I have invitations to go to Manitoba, which I'm really looking forward to because that is the home of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, which is keeping a whole bunch of archives private and won't allow them to be released to the public, even though that's part of its trust deed to be sharing this information with Canadians, and Nova Scotia, St. Mary's University. And there's three that I wanted to talk to you about that are very important, and two of them actually have had the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms intervene in trying to help me to hold those institutions to account. The first one is the University of Lethbridge, which is an amazing institution, which I've studied in detail. And this all happened, and John was mentioning this, in February 2023. I was invited by Paul Viminetz, who was later fired because of the invitation that he extended to me. That led to him having a target put on him for doing that. He invited me to give a talk and to give 2 lectures in his classes. And the talk, as John mentioned, was, does wokeism threaten academic freedom? And of course, we heard loud and clear that it definitely does. And it was argued that by the president, Mike Mon, that the harm that would be caused by my talk would impede reconciliation. That was his argument, and therefore my talk should be canceled. And this is an institution that has been completely taken over by indigenization activists. And they will not allow anyone to put forward arguments that challenges their rent-seeking position within the institution, whereby they siphon off, millions of dollars for nonsensical initiatives, which are destructive to the academic character of that institution. And the main things that I was claimed to have been engaged in that would cause harm were questioning the unmarked graves and denying the genocide that had happened because of the residential schools. And I don't question the existence of the unmarked graves. There are many unmarked graves in cemeteries. What I question is the existence of clandestine burials for which there is no evidence whatsoever. And that should be the nature of the institution, is to discuss whether there are in fact clandestine burials. And it seems to me that the arguments about genocide are really don't have a lot of weight that is behind them. But in a normal institution, you would discuss these ideas. But at the University of Lethbridge, they don't allow that to be discussed. Like that's not allowed. And we were, the Justice Center is helping Jonah Pickle as a student and myself to sue them. And we're hoping to go to court, I believe, next year about this matter. But it's a difficult case because universities can decide that they just don't want to rent you space. Like it's up to them to decide. And because they're not academic anymore, they don't make these determinations on the basis of reason, evidence, and logic. They make it on the basis of whether an Aboriginal group is going to be upset or not. That's how they make these judgments. So that's the first institution that's in serious trouble, University of Lethbridge. Second one is the University of Regina, which I was invited to go and give 2 talks by Robert Thomas, who's here tonight. He's the president of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. We thought it'd be a good idea to give a talk on indigenization and academic freedom, one talk, and another one on the unmarked graves in Kamloops. And is it appropriate to call that a hoax? That was the question. And there's a number of views on whether it should be considered to be a hoax or not. Anyway, a lot of professors and students got upset about this, and the university canceled those 2 talks, saying that this was a threat to safety and security. This is going to be a lot of horrible things that are going to be happening. Ideas are going to be discussed that people might not agree with, all those sorts of things. And the Justice Center did try to intervene in this matter, but it became a very complicated technical matter, and it's not really viable to pursue this case at this time. However, I discovered a very, very important weapon against this totalitarianism. And this is what is called spectrum street epistemology, which was developed by the academic Peter Boghossian, a philosopher from Portland State. So I told the University of Regina that I was going to come in and do a spectrum street epistemology session on the question of whether the University of Regina protects academic freedom. That was going to be the claim that they do. And I brought in Lloyd Hawkeye Robertson, who's a psychology professor, an adjunct, and we went in there with Daniel Page with a videographer, and before we did, it was strongly suggested to us by the University of Regina that we should not arrive on campus, that this could be a serious problem if we arrive there. And we said, well, thank you for your concerns, but we're coming in. So we came into the University of Regina and we produced a video on this called The University of Regina Rumble, which is on YouTube. And it was great. So a bunch of a professor and his students arrived to try to give us a hard time, and we engaged the students and we talked to them. And this is all recorded and available on YouTube. And it is a massive embarrassment for the University of Regina, because when we arrived there, one security person met us and asked us what could he do to help us at the University of Regina. Well, it was my understanding that we were posing a serious security and safety risk for the University of Regina. So why are we being met with one person who's basically asking if there's anything that can be done? So obviously this is, again, attempts at intimidation to stop things from being discussed at this institution. Which brings me to my favorite example, Thompson Rivers University. Probably one of the worst universities in Canada. It's competing. I know it's a bit of a low bar here, but it is just an absolute embarrassment, and fired a professor by the name of Derek Pine a couple of years ago because Derek was raising the alarm about his colleagues publishing in predatory journals. And a predatory journal, for people who don't know what that is, you pay the journal to have your article published. So there's no quality control whatsoever, and in fact there's an incentive to publish terrible substandard articles. Anyway, when he did this, when he was raising the alarm about this, He was charged with harassment and was fired from that university. So this is the kind of thing we're dealing with. Anyway, we didn't book a talk at Thompson Rivers University. I went in there with Kathy Drake, who's a former student at Mount Royal University, and Simon Harrogod, who's a videographer. We arrived at Thompson Rivers, and we were just kind of scouting out the locations, and we went up to the law school to kind of look at their materials, because the law school, of course, is a massive part of the fabrications that have been going on with respect to Aboriginal law, because it's an Aboriginal industry stronghold at Thompson Rivers. Anyway, as we were walking around, we were approached by the head of safety, who said, handed us a policy and said that their policy makes it so that you have to apply to use their space at the university. And that it was private property, and we would need to leave because we were on the house of the Kamloops, which was the Aboriginal group which was responsible for making the false claim that the remains of 215 children have been found. And we said, well, we're staying. We're going to stay, and we're going to do the spectral sheet epistemology event here. And he said, well, we'd really like you to leave. He said, well, we're not leaving. We're going to stay. So we set out our event, and we did it, and they disappeared. The safety division, the entire group that came out to meet us and to intimidate us and to tell us that we couldn't be there, we just said, well, we're not going to leave, and if you remove us, you will suffer serious reputational damage when we talk about how you will not allow, on the 4th anniversary of the false claim about the 215 remains, to be discussed when your president, Brett Fairbairn, has said a number of times that the remains of 215 children have been found. And his cultural advisor, Ted Gottfriedson, said in September 2024, along with Didi DeRose, who's the chancellor, the head of the university, that the bodies of children have been found in that apple orchard. So you are spreading misinformation, and you are not allowing academics to come in to discuss these claims and to actually provide a critical analysis of what you're saying. So many of these things are attempts to just stop the discussion, and if you do press these what I think it's Amy Wax calls them midwits, these middle management bureaucrats who are totally opposed to academic freedom and open discussion, they will back away and they will not do anything. So we need to seriously take this on. So, in terms of the future, I realize I'm very honored to receive this award. It's been very helpful to me psychologically and to giving me some feeling of vindication. But I think that that's not really the major focus of attention that we should be looking at. The first one is the battle for reinstatement at Mount Royal University. I will not give 1/1000th of 1 inch on this question. I should have been reinstated. I should never have gone through this. And if I'm not reinstated, universities are over in Canada, because this is a ridiculous case that should never have happened. And people at Mount Royal University should be held to account for the terrible things that they have done, not to mention all the professors and the union that was involved in enabling this to happen in the first place. Secondly, the spectrum sheet epistemology. This is a great weapon against universities, and you go in there and you just have these claims and you ask, do you strongly disagree, do you strongly agree, and neutral, maybe you don't even know anything about it, and you ask people why they agree or disagree. And we had this fantastic conversation at Thompson Rivers University between Jenna, who thought that the remains of 215 children had been found, and Hal, who thought that was highly improbable. And we had that go on for an hour on video that anyone can watch and see. This is what happens at a real university. this kind of discussion, and there was no animosity, no problems at all, and we all came to a realization that what we need at the Kamloops site is excavations. And $12.1 million has been provided already for the excavations that were supposed to happen between 2021 to 2023. So why have those excavations not been done, and what is the government gonna do about the money that was supposed to have been spent on the excavations that were never spent for that purpose? Those questions need to be asked. And then finally, I have a great bunch of videographers that I've worked with over the last year. Daniel Page, who's in Manitoba, and Simon Harrigot, who's in Kamloops, and Greg Wycliffe, who's in Ontario. And we will be producing videos on these universities and this constant failure to be able to uphold the academic mission of the universities, because that is what we need, is we need to enable the universities to become academic spaces once more. Thank you very much.